It's good to be with you, good to be back again with you. And as Peter said, commenting about my hometown, of course, you can't expect to get a mayor who's been mayor for 16 years a microphone and then mention their hometown and not expect them to say something about it. But if you do look at what has happened in the downtown, where that station has leveraged, for every dollar we put into it, it's leveraged $197 of private sector investment within 3 blocks of that facility. And a national magazine recently called Meridian the undesignated or unofficial cultural heart of Mississippi. That's pretty big for a city that had abandoned its downtown, its station, its opera house, its Art Deco building that became the hotel. It's quite a turnaround. And before I really begin my remarks, I want to acknowledge the work of 2 people that I don't believe are here right now, but one is Karen Hedlund. You heard from her last night. You heard from Knox this morning about important projects through the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. The Mobile to New Orleans route and then the I-20 route, neither of which would be possible without the strong stand of the Surface Transportation Board. They have become much more responsive to the needs of passenger and freight rail and willing to take a difficult stand. They did so on the Gulf, where they pulled in the freights, the Port of Mobile, and Amtrak, and literally forced a resolution. And it pleased me so that, and I believe it was Karen that said during the hearings, that the aggrieved party of the case between New Orleans and Mobile was not the freights, was not the port, was not Amtrak. The aggrieved party were the people of the Gulf that had been disconnected since Katrina and deserve the right to have a choice of passenger rail once again. The I-20 came about because with Canadian Pacific wanting to merge with and acquire Kansas City Southern, the Surface Transportation Board required commitments from Canadian Pacific that if this moved forward, this merger, traffic would not be impacted negatively certainly in the freight world and to the connecting freight partners, but passenger rail would also have an ability to move forward in this region. And because of the STB's press, and CP was glad to do it, committed to the New Orleans to Baton Rouge route and to the I-20 from Meridian to Dallas-Fort Worth within 2 years of that merger to begin serious work on examining how they could deploy passenger rail across that connection. So those are 2 profound actions that took a courageous STB to bring people into the room and press them into resolution and agreement. The other, if she will speak later, is Nicole Busick with Amtrak. And I've thanked her personally, but I want to thank her from the podium here. Her team, Arun Rao and Ben Dodson, have been great to work with on the Gulf service and very transparent and open with information supporting the I-20. And for the first time, Amtrak, in a letter of support for grants for station development on the I-20, referred to the I-20 as a long-distance extension of the Crescent. It's the first time since I was board chair that Amtrak has referred to it in that way, and Nicole's team as they talk with us and share information on the I-20, refer to it again as an extension of the long-distance system. So that's very important. And the fact that Amtrak has stayed the course and committed to provide the passenger rail equipment to begin the Gulf service is exceptional at this particular time, when unfortunately there is less and less equipment available across the nation. And I'll address that later. So I was a mayor for 16 years. I started a career that I had no aspirations to begin. But I have spent my adult life at the intersection of how we build cities and towns, large and small, that have vibrant economies, especially in their downtowns, and create a sense of place that identify who they are and who they aspire to be. And all of that is linked with transportation choices that connect their people to the daily needs within the community and to the larger region and nation that they wish to be a part of. I've worked now in 147 different cities and towns through Transportation for America, providing technical assistance. But as a part of that work, for 30 years now, I have fought for a national passenger rail system that truly knits this country together. And system is the operative word there. My journey with passenger rail began when Amtrak was in crisis. We were at a hinge point in the development or extinction of passenger rail. Amtrak chose within itself to cut the long-distance system, including my train through Meridian, Mississippi, cut long-distance service, furlough employees, all with the vain aspiration of becoming self-sufficient. Beware anyone who tells you we're going to be self-sufficient at some point. They'll name a year. There is no passenger rail system in the world that pays for itself out of the fare box. That's just a fact. Any more than aviation pays for itself out of the fees and ticket charges. Think about it. If your airline ticket had to cover the air traffic control system, TSA, build the airports, build the runways, why, there would be one airline and your ticket would be thousands of dollars. Your automobile, when you back out of your driveway, you're on someone else's infrastructure that they have paid for. I live in Washington, D.C. now. I haven't had a car in 15 years. Do not miss one bit of it. Don't miss the expense of it either. But my tax dollars that I'm getting ready to send in the 15th is building your highway infrastructure and street infrastructure. And it should. But passenger rail needs to be viewed in the same way. So don't take the bait that it will be self-sufficient. Well, I got to the Amtrak board because Senator Trent Lott insisted that I be appointed. And if Karen Hedlund was still here, she would tell you that she was up to be nominated and Trent stepped in and moved Karen out and moved me in. But she has forgiven me of that. But when I got to the Amtrak board, I found that Amtrak had lost credibility with the United States Congress. There had been entirely too much unfulfilled happy talk about where we were in passenger rail in this country. As chair, I had somehow the great good fortune and will to hire David Gunn as the president of Amtrak. David was a railroad man. He was committed to the vision of passenger rail that would connect the people of this country. And you know what? David and I did something unusual. We rode the trains. As president and chair, we were out in the system. We rode the long distance. We rode shorter corridors. We certainly rode the corridor. And while we were out there, we visited the cities that were served by passenger rail. We talked to the employees. They knew us on sight. And every Amtrak executive did the same thing. They rode the trains over which they administered, and the board did too. And Amtrak employees, the executives, talked to the on-board employees so that you get a sense of what they face, and equally important, they talk to the passengers themselves to get a gauge of the system they were running. Joe McHugh headed up legislative affairs for us on Capitol Hill, and every day Joe was on the Hill with his team. And because he gave them straight talk and honest answers, Joe was able to restore the trust and confidence of the U.S. Congress in what Amtrak would tell them. Even those who were never supportive of passenger rail, like Senator John McCain, still respected Amtrak's position because he knew he was hearing the truth. And if there was bad news to deliver, then David Gunn and I delivered the bad news. We didn't wait for it to be pulled out of us. And David and I made quite a team together. I remember being in Senator Specter's office, and if he were still alive and on the stage, I don't think he would mind if I told you that he was referred to on Capitol Hill as Snarlin' Arlen Specter. Tough customer. And we were in his office, and we had told him we had to take Acela out of service, if you remember, early on because of issues with the underpinning in the trucks. And Senator Specter said, well, just get more parts. And David looked at him and said, Senator, I don't go down to Pep Boys to buy parts for my train. Well, the senator looked back, and I stepped in to say, Senator, what Mr. Gunn means to say is. So David gave him the hard, blunt truth. I dressed it up a little so they could perhaps hear it better. We created the Amtrak Mayors Advisory Council. Over 500 Amtrak mayors out there. They're free advocates for you, but you have to talk to them and listen to them and respond to them. And everyone who worked for Amtrak, from the person on board the train doing onboard service all the way up to the president, served at Amtrak because they were dedicated to a mission of providing a critical transportation choice to the American people. They wanted a railroad retirement. There were no bonuses for these employees. Well, let's take a stock of where we are in recent years. The Amtrak Mayors Advisory Council is no more. That deprives you of those 500 free advocates. The long-distance system has been disinvested in. First pulling diners, then pulling edible food served to those on board long distance, cutting back on equipment, cutting back on crews, and yet during COVID, the long-distance trains provided more riders and more revenue than the Northeast Corridor and the state-supported trains combined. Why? Because those long-distance trains provide a connectivity that is not an option, it's a must for the people who used it during COVID. And yet, Amtrak furloughed more employees then. I think it was a 30% reduction during COVID. Didn't get many of those back, and obviously didn't learn the lesson from the first time they made those kind of choices. And the Congressional Budget Office assessed that when you cut like that, you don't save money. In fact, it costs you to do so. The executive staff at Amtrak over the past 6 or 7 years has almost tripled. They're called D&E band employees, almost tripled. And some of those hires are exceptional, and I certainly hope they get to remain. But that's 3 times the executive, and your line employees are expected to do more with less. And then there's the issue of bonuses, however you feel about them. When bonuses last year for the executive staff was $50 million, and before that $100 million, then that brings a bad light on you when Congress begins to look. The Northeast Corridor, I get messages every day of cancellations along the corridor. You've read about problems with the catenary and the infrastructure there. The Acela equipment is now almost 3 years late in hitting the corridor, and that has put a tremendous pressure on Amtrak and its fleet. You'll be hearing from Alstom later in the day. I am told it may be late summer, early fall before it's deployed. Every day that it's not out there on the system means that the Acela service that we first rolled out is past its life, and there are fewer and fewer and fewer of those trains out there. That's not good for anyone in the country. Long-distance fleet replacement is not moving forward at this point. And then, of course, the latest was the Horizon fleet that's been taken out. It's being assessed now which cars can be replaced, but I think it would be fair to say that Horizon as a functioning fleet is done. It will not be a part of the future, and that means that state-supported trains, Amtrak is having to pull equipment off of the corridor to run state-supported trains. And that's one more pinch point for them. And I see Nicole has entered the room. I told them what an effort you and your team have put forward to see that the equipment is available for the start of the Gulf service. And at a time of this critical juncture on equipment, I sincerely appreciate that effort to see that it's there. I know it is not easy to make that happen. There's not enough equipment for what we have now, much less the 69 corridors that aspired to. But let's turn our eyes to Congress. Well, Knox told you we run the Southern Rail Commission all over the Hill when they're there. We go to 28 different offices when they come. We go to every chair and every ranking member of every committee of jurisdiction in the House and the Senate Appropriations and Authorization, because we want them to know us today and look for us to come tomorrow and understand our ranking member today will one day be chair, and you better be visiting them when they're ranking. I had a ranking member who's now chair of the Committee of Jurisdiction over Amtrak say that they had not seen anyone from Amtrak in 3 years. That's not the way you can build the kind of relationships you need. And when you do that, you're not lobbying. You're going to ask, how is my service going in your state? Let me tell you what we're spending in your state. Let me tell you about the jobs, the dollar turnover, what can we do more? What do your constituents say about our service? You build a rapport. You want them to recognize you when they see you coming down the hall. And when you add to that the fact that IIJA, as transformative as it was, the money has been so slow in coming out. And Amtrak has waited and waited for dollars to come forward that they desperately need to make some of the changes that they will make. I can tell you the process has been very difficult, and I would say that success was viewed as the process created rather than the implementation that actually matters. I'm hoping that will change. So out of this very worst of times, you hear questions from some, without being named. Yeah, our passenger rail system, when compared to Europe and Asia, doesn't measure up. Why can't we have passenger rail like Europe and Asia? Well, the answer is simple. Those national governments invested in providing passenger rail as a viable option for their people, a critical option for their people, just like we have invested heavily in our highway system in this nation. We have to have that kind of commitment to investment in passenger rail. They'll also say, well, just shut down the long-distance system. That's going to save money. It does not save money. It costs money because you have all of the back of the house that the long-distance system carries merely deferred over to the CARTA and the state-supported trains. And you lose the connectivity that the long-distance system brings between those CARTAs and the Northeast CARTA itself. The passenger rail will not survive if we gut the long-distance system, which was the reason Amtrak was created, mind you. So this is a wake-up call. Amtrak, and thus passenger rail, is in crisis. The board and the management now are facing tough choices. I think you'll see within the next 2 months announcements that there will be significant cuts at Amtrak, be a significant cut in headcount, could be as high as 20%. That would be 5,000 employees. I hope that is not the case, because that would begin to cut into the meat and bone of the system and the service. But there will be significant cuts coming, and that's from within the company. The administration will choose a new president of Amtrak. I think the board will stand firm that it must be someone who is committed to the existence of the company, not the destruction of the company. FRA has assigned 2 individuals at least to meet with the board and be with the board. I think you can expect for funding streams to be pushed out. We're beginning to see that as a reality just on the grants within the Southern Rail Commission. I think there's an opportunity there. So once again, passenger rail is at a hinge point, and it's going to be redefined. It will either be defined by the collective that is within this room, or it will be defined for us. So what do we want? Well, if your want is merely more money, everything's fine. Any failing can be solved with more money, then that's not a message that's going to resonate on Capitol Hill today. I can tell you that. there needs to be some structural changes in how we approach passenger rail. Number one, we need dedicated funding streams, so we're not going year after year after year begging for funding, and that shouldn't be seen as funding just for Amtrak, it's for passenger rail. Help take the target off of Amtrak, it's funding for passenger rail, dedicated funding. We need, and Jim Matthews mentioned this, we need a national equipment pool, I believe. We're in a crisis over the delivery of equipment. Whether that national equipment pool is housed strictly within DOT or some other entity that's created with a board of directors whose only job is to design, standardize, build, and see delivered passenger rail equipment for Amtrak or other providers to use, I believe is a worthy goal. That equipment is bought with taxpayers' dollars, and it should be owned by the people of the United States. And the other issue we need to resolve is the issue of liability and indemnification. Those two issues, even more so than negotiating with the freight host, appear to be stumbling blocks that cannot be overcome as long as they remain an issue for anyone else who wants to provide passenger rail service. Does that provide competition for Amtrak? Yes, it would, but I think it can be healthy competition. I think Amtrak can be a better company with a little healthy competition and provides choices at the state and regional level. And if the maps that we've been shown the past 2 days were to come about, no one provider can supply the passenger rail for all of those maps. So those are two big issues, or three when you look at the dedicated funding. By the way, we're writing policy now, hopefully for introduction in the next authorization bill. So the call to action is Amtrak needs friends, and passenger rail needs friends now. And we cannot be siloed in our efforts. Peter, what happens here in Texas can't stay in Texas. You know, it can't be, there's a little something going in Montana and something else in Florida and something entirely different out in California. No, it's got to be Mississippi and Montana. It's got to be Maine and Alabama. It's got to be Louisiana and Texas. It's got to be those voices collectively demanding with clear eyes of things that may need to be changed, but demanding a passenger rail that this country deserves and our people aspire to. I went to visit Senator Cassidy's office, who is a huge champion for the I-20. You should really be pleased with Senator Cassidy from Louisiana and Congressman Moran, another huge supporter of the I-20. Took the mayors of Shreveport, Ruston, and Monroe. And we were on the Hill visiting. They were talking about a number of issues of economic development critical for the future of their 3 cities with each office we visited. And we were with Senator Cassidy's staff, and Senator Cassidy came through the door, and if you've been in congressional offices, often they have a card with who they're meeting with and why they're having this meeting. He came in and he stopped and he looked over at me and he looked at his card and he said, "I thought I was coming to talk to Louisiana mayors about a bright future for their hometowns, and I see a train sitting there," pointing at me. And I said, "Well, Senator, when you talk to these Louisiana mayors about the future of their community, you're talking about a train." And I think that's a message that resonates in any office you go into. So as you begin to tell your stories and as you begin to work with your colleagues in other states and other parts of the country, and as you go to visit not just your senators and congressmen, but all of those who have a voice in what transpires on passenger rail, I want you to be so recognizable and so frequent that when they see you, they see a train coming. Thank you.